Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Easy Chat English podcast. I'm Amelia, and I'm here with my co-host, Ethan. How's it going, Ethan?
Hey, everyone. I'm doing great, thank you. And I'm excited about today's topic because it's something so many English learners can relate to. I can understand English, but I can't speak English.
Yes, it's a common challenge. You know, I've met so many people who say they can watch English movies, understand conversations, even read books. But when it comes to speaking, it's like there's a block.
Absolutely. And I went through that myself when I was learning English. I could understand almost everything. But actually, speaking was a different story. I'd feel nervous, and the words just wouldn't come out right. It's like there's this gap between understanding and speaking.
That's exactly it, a language gap, and it can be so frustrating. But the good news is, we're going to dive into why this happens and share some tips to help you bridge that gap. Plus, we'll include some key words and expressions that can help you along the way. Let's get started. So, let's start by talking about why understanding English can be easier than speaking it. One of the main reasons is that listening and reading are more passive activities. When you're listening to a podcast or reading a book, you don't have to actively produce the language. You're just absorbing it.
Exactly. And that's what we call passive learning. You're taking in the information, but you're not necessarily using it in a conversation. Speaking, on the other hand, is all about active engagement. It requires you to think quickly and respond in real time, which can feel overwhelming.
That's so true. I remember when I was learning English, I could understand a lot of what people were saying to me, but I struggled to reply. It's like I had all this passive knowledge, but turning it into active skills was a whole different challenge.
Same here. It took me a while to realize that listening comprehension and speaking are two different skills. Just because you understand doesn't automatically mean you'll be able to speak fluently. It's normal to have a stronger receptive skill like listening before your productive skill like speaking catches up.
And listeners, if this sounds familiar, don't worry, you're not alone. The key is to understand that this is part of the learning process, and there are ways to turn that passive knowledge into speaking confidence.
All right, now let's talk about overcoming the speaking barrier. When I first started, I was so afraid of making mistakes. It's like, I knew what I wanted to say, but I was worried I'd sound silly or say something wrong. Have you ever felt that way, Amelia?
And listeners, if this sounds familiar, don't worry, you're not alone. The key is to understand that this is part of the learning process, and there are ways to turn that passive knowledge into speaking confidence.
That's right. And one technique that helped me was shadowing. It's when you listen to a native speaker and try to repeat what they're saying, copying their pronunciation and rhythm. It really helps with building confidence because you're practicing speaking without having to think too much about the content.
I love that technique. Another tip is repetition. The more you repeat words and phrases, the more natural they become. And don't forget about using language apps or even joining a language exchange. It's a great way to practice speaking with native speakers who can help correct your mistakes in a friendly way.
Yes, and it's amazing how much your speaking improves when you just put yourself out there. So listeners, remember, practice makes progress, not perfection. Keep pushing yourself, and you'll see those breakthrough moments in your speaking.
Now let's move on to building confidence in speaking. One of the best ways to do this is to start with small conversations. You don't have to dive into complex discussions right away. Even just saying hello to someone or asking for directions can boost your confidence.
I remember my first successful conversation in English. It was just a small chat with a cashier, but it gave me such a confidence boost. It made me realize that I could actually communicate, even if my sentences weren't perfect.
That's such a good point. Those little confidence-building moments can make a huge difference. And it's important to celebrate small wins along the way. If you manage to order coffee in English or chat with a friend for 5 minutes, give yourself some credit.
Totally. And for those of you listening, don't be too hard on yourselves. Progress takes time. Focus on how far you've come, not just how far you have to go. And remember, every conversation, no matter how short, is a step forward.
Exactly. So keep challenging yourself to use English in real life situations, and you'll start to see that speaking barrier break down little by little.
Now let's get into some practical exercises for building fluency. One of my favorites is role-playing. You can pretend you're at a restaurant or asking for help in a store. It's a great way to practice common situations you might encounter.
That's a great tip. Another exercise I like is self-recording. Just record yourself speaking about a topic for a few minutes and then listen back. It helps you hear what you sound like and where you might need to improve.
And don't forget about mimicking. Try to copy how native speakers say certain phrases. It helps you get used to the natural rhythm and intonation of the language. You can even repeat after TV shows or podcasts like this one.
Definitely. So, listeners, try these exercises at home and don't forget to practice daily if you can. Even just a few minutes can make a big difference. All right, it's time for some listener questions. One question we hear a lot is, how can I think in English when speaking?
That's a great question. Thinking in English instead of translating from your native language is a big step. One tip is to start small. Try to name objects around you in English or describe what you're doing in your head. This helps you get used to using English directly.
Yes, and don't worry about being perfect. It's more about building the habit of thinking in English. And if you make a mistake, that's okay. It's all part of the process. Embrace mistakes. They're actually a sign that you're learning.
Another question we often get is, what if I make mistakes when I speak?
That's a common fear. But here's the thing, even native speakers make mistakes. It's better to speak without fear than to stay silent. People are usually more interested in what you're saying than whether it's perfect.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners, don't let the fear of making mistakes hold you back. The more you practice speaking, the more natural it will feel, and the less you'll worry about those little errors.
Well, that's all we have for today's episode. We hope we've given you some helpful tips to go from I can understand English to I can speak English confidently.
Yes, and remember, it's all about practice, patience, and putting yourself out there. Speaking might feel scary at first, but with time, you'll see progress.
So take the plunge. Speak with friends, record yourself, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. You'll get better every day.
And if you liked this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with a friend who might need a little extra motivation.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Keep practicing, and remember, you've got this.
Bye for now.